The small hole, the small black dot in the center of the mirror on the front, I use for collimation purposes. I also use a Newtonian autocollimator, which is basically a laser that reflects through the eyepiece holder or focuser to the secondary mirror, down to the primary mirror, back up, hopefully, when it's properly aligned, back to the secondary mirror, and if the mirror is perfectly aligned, it will come back right up into the same hole that the light went from. Welcome to Telescope Maker's Workshop. I'm Francis O'Reilly, and we'll be discussing the optical tube assembly. I'm your host tonight. Welcome to the Telescope Maker's Workshop. I'm Francis O'Reilly, and I'll be your host tonight. Tonight we're discussing the optical tube assembly and the assembling of the same for a new telescope. This is an 8-inch f6 telescope that will be mounted as a sidewalk telescope, also commonly known as the Dobsonian. In order to do that, we have a tube, a 10-inch steel tube, which I've had powder coated. The tube was procured from Hastings Pipe in Hastings, Nebraska. They have a website on which you can purchase their products, and they actually devote a portion of their website to the amateur telescope makers. I had it powder coated on the outside, a deep, dark, luscious maroon with gold flecks. On the inside, I cleaned it completely, and I painted it a very dull, flat black. No discussion of a sidewalk telescope can be complete without discussing the manner in which the tube, the optical tube assembly, is attached to the mount. And to do that, in this particular telescope, there are many ways of doing it. What I've done is I've built a box, a square box out of plywood, and I use a nice grade of birch plywood. And the box was 10.5 by 10.5 inches inside diameter. It turned out to be a little bit too large because the tube itself was 10 inches, actually 10 and a 16th in that area. No tube you're going to buy for this purpose is going to be perfectly round. So what I did was I took some 1/4-inch plywood and I mounted that on the inside of the tube and took out most of the play. Probably the most critical aspect, the one area that is really has to really be accurate, is the attachment of the side bearings to the tube or to the box. Because if they're not attached properly, then as you rotate the altitude on the telescope, it's not going to rotate evenly, and it will bind, and you're not going to have a very smooth operating telescope. In order to do that, what I'm doing is I'm taking a drafting square. This happens to be a 36-inch, 3-foot drafting square. We're going to be discussing everything in metric measurements today. And I measure diagonally across the rectangular side of the tube. And I come up with 16 inches. Taking a pen, I'm just going to mark very carefully at the 8-inch mark. I'm then going to measure it the other way. Again, very carefully, making sure I line up my corners properly, very neatly, very thoroughly. Once again, I come to 8 inches, 16 inches from diagonally across, and I'm going to mark at 8 inches. There's an old adage, measure twice, cut once. Let's measure again, this time the other direction. Measure once doesn't mean clamp everything down and then look at it twice. It means actually take two separate measurements. Come to 8 inches, mark, do it again, come to 8 inches, and mark. Now, a little needs to be said at this time as to how I actually made this box that I'm going to be mounting over my telescope tube. And what I did was I went from Ray Cash's plans. Ray Cash posted some plans on the Sidewalk Astronomer's website, and that's a organization out of San Francisco, California, where John Dobson is a member and probably the charter member. He was the one who designed this concept of the Sidewalk Telescope. And I pretty much took from his plans the actual mount, and I followed it very closely. I cut 2 pieces of wood. Actually, when I purchased the wood in a 4x8 sheet from Home Depot of a finer plywood, and the staff at Home Depot was good enough to cut the wood for me. But I actually cut a piece that was 12.5 by, as I recall, it should have been by 10.5. It looks like it's actually by about 10 5/8. I'm sorry, 12 by 10 5/8. It should have been 12 by 10.5. And I cut 2 pieces of that dimension. I cut another 2 pieces that were 10.5 by 10.5. And I attached them opposite to each other. Now, in the instructions that were given by Ray Cash, it basically provides that you nail them together, and that's fine. I'm more of a belts and suspenders kind of guy. I glued them and then I screwed them together using decking nails, and I feel that I've got a really solid box. However, when I put the interior plywood lining in, I just glued that on, and I'm pretty satisfied that that should be sufficient. Now, I've made my marks in the side of my box, and I have 2 6-inch circles. And by the way, everything's been stained. I took a golden pecan stain. I'm not a woodworker by profession. I'm just a office worker per se, and so I'm not the best at this. And I had to learn how to do this. But probably the best way to stain anything is to put it on a rag and then just rub the rag over the wood. I tried it with a brush. I wasn't real satisfied with the results, but it's sufficient. And then once you've stained it and you've got the stain on, you should then follow up by coating the items you've stained with a nice polyurethane. The round bearings, the manner in which they're made with a router, leaves a hole in one side, and that's right in the center of the bearing. And that's a good thing to use as a guide for what the center of the bearing is. With respect to where you're going to be drilling your hole, if you've done everything right and your panels are all square, you have a pretty good idea with all that measuring you did as to where you're going to be drilling that hole. And what I typically do is I start with a relatively small drill bit. I've got a nice set of drill bits. And I'm going to drill the hole with a small drill bit first, and then I'm going to make larger and larger holes until I have something that's appropriate for the size 1.5 inch, number 8 1.5 inch wood screws that I've purchased at the Home Depot that I'm going to be using to attach the side bearing onto the box. I will also glue it on, and once I have the center in pretty good shape, I'll probably put a couple of more screws in also, just to make sure everything's real solid. It should be noted, by the way, that these circles, these circular bearings, are going to ride on Teflon that's going to be on the box part of the mount, and